are Vineyard.
Somos Viña.
We are Vineyard.
The songs do stuff, right? I mean, Dan Wilt has said for years and years, songs are a place that you go. Songs are also tools, I think. They give you the ability to pastor a room in a certain direction. In our moment in particular, we have to be very cautious about being manipulative with songs, but songs are also meant to be used in particular moments to move a room in a direction. I mean, I always remember the story, Casey, you told me about Wimber instructing songwriters to write songs about the cross, right? And I'm sure there were lots of other moments like where there was just a pastoral awareness. We need to inject something specific into this room, or all the songs of renewal or the songs of healing and, right? The songs of scripture. I was talking to someone on the airplane flying into Cincinnati yesterday who was also at the conference. She was talking about how she learned so much of the Bible from singing Vineyard songs. And she would find a psalm and be like, oh, I've known this for years. It's in a song.
Welcome to the We Are Vineyard podcast, conversations to help us grow with Jesus and each other. This week, we're launching a mini-series around a very special session from our national conferences this summer, A History of Vineyard and Song, where we explored the themes that have marked the moves of the Spirit in the Vineyard since it began in 1974, and some of the associated songs. In this episode, you'll hear the story of how this session came into being, from those who dreamed, planned, and helped execute it, from Vineyard Worship, Adam Russell, Casey Coram, Melissa Keller, and from Vineyard USA, Caleb Maskell and me, Nicole Dill. Let's listen in.
What's up, team? We're podcasting.
Here we are.
That's right. Thank you for somebody helping me out. I'm looking at people. No one's talking.
Pregnant pause.
Pregnant pause. Well, so fun to get to have this conversation with you because we've had an amazing time doing conference work. And so maybe we can spend a little time unpacking that work. We can just jump right into it. I guess the first thing I want to do in this conversation is just maybe ask the question, why did we decide to retell the Vineyard story? Maybe that's not what I'm asking, but I'm sure some people are like, well, that was a cool session. Why are we retelling the Vineyard story? So maybe somebody wants to pick that up.
I can start. For a couple of years now, I've had a dream that it would be cool to tell our story through our songs. Because I think the truth is, like, in any movement, and certainly in the Vineyard movement, the songs tell our story in some like really profound ways, right? So if you were to like, I don't know, get really detailed about it, we could look at the way that we've written songs over the last 50 years and really map that to a lot of what like the Lord has been doing in the Vineyard. We could map that to a lot of sort of moments, if you like, you know, the renewal moments or the cross moments or prophetic moments or healing moments. And there's so many things like that where there's like a sort of a base of evergreen songs that are just like the worship of the church. But then there's also these kind of distinctive type songs as well. So when we had the opportunity to do the story of the Vineyard in Song, or I should say a story of the Vineyard in Song
Definite articles
session,
matter.
They do matter. A story of the Vineyard in Song session at the national conference. It was kind of a way of compressing that project into its like shortest form, right? A tight little form where we get to look at who we've been through what we've sung, which is really the language of our heart as much as our head. And bring our head and our heart together in a way that reminds us of who we are, reminds us of why we're in the room. I mean, that was my big hope from the session, from my side, was that folks would be reminded of their calling, like why are they in the room, so that we can say, okay, Lord, I remember that. Now, what do you have for us going forward?
Yeah, and it is interesting how our songs, they become little distillations of so many things that God has done through the years. So yeah, great way to maybe pick up our Vineyard story. I'm wondering, maybe Casey, you can talk about this for a second because you're one of our song guys. Caleb was talking about how at various points in our history, the songs sort of say something about the thing that was going on. And right. I kind of like what Caleb was saying there, that you have these evergreen songs that sort of just persist through times, seasons, moments, and then you have these other ones that peak out. I'm wondering maybe if you could just talk for a second about some of the moments and some of the songs that pop through for you that tell particular stories of the Vineyard?
Interesting. I mean, I think one of the powerful things about songs in general is there's this mystery of the language of worship in the Bible is hard to divorce from music. So, and songs are very much the language of the heart. Songs also go with us in ways that sermons maybe don't, because we can sing the songs, we can't sing the sermons. So, and I also think there's also an interesting piece. Granted, our songwriters are gifted people in their own right, but there's an element where the songs sort of become almost of the people more, because they kind of get embodied in our churches and in our rank and file people. And I, just as a person in the Vineyard, I certainly relate to that, these kind of moments, number one in the Vineyard, but also kind of relating in my own life of these. They're vehicles which God has used to change the trajectory of my life. So, I mean, literally for me, it goes all the way back to, I came into the Vineyard from a musical background, but no church background. So when I walked into the Vineyard, the early songs of the Vineyard might as well have been the hymns of the church, because I didn't really have, I mean, maybe I knew Amazing Grace or something.
Sure.
But, and they were kind of another era, especially the earlier songs were very jazzy, so they're kind of like they weren't really my music, but then there was a shift in like the late 80s, early 90s, where I think, even though I was involved in worship pretty much from the beginning, where we'll get around to talking about Brian Dirksen in particular, Cindy Rithmeyer, the songs, it's almost like the songs of the next generation came in. And maybe that's another thing about our songs, is they tend to be, they're almost the voice of the next generation of the Vineyard. And some, granted, we have songwriters of lots of generations, but for me, it was that moment when people like Brian started to write. And I remember an independent record, and I've said this on various versions of these podcasts before, came out of Langley Vineyard called Changed by Your Glory. This was like an independent record in 1989 that just happened to have songs like Refiner's Fire and Faithful One and Good to Me and all these songs that became like staples, certainly staples of the Vineyard, let alone staples of the whole global church, just out of the guts of a local church and out of the life of like a writer like Brian Dirksen or Andy Parker or the like. So that's definitely one of those moments, like Refiner's Fire, Good to Me. I think for me, there's those moments as a worship leader and as a creative person, that record and those songs were like kind of turned my life into like, oh, you can make music that this is the Vineyard's birth in this. So it's weird that it took this to kind of, for me to catch a clue. But like, you can actually make music that comes from you, that sounds like you, but also touches the heart of God and, empowers the song of the people. That record and those songs from that record certainly are those moments, or one of those moments for me. And then I just think along the way, songs kind of lead us into, I think of seasons of renewal. There's almost like an ebb and flow. You can kind of see that, that's one of the things we tried to highlight in the Vineyard. Carol Wimber used to say, one of the founders of the Vineyard said, as our songs go, there goes the movement. So if the songs start to dry up, the movement's in trouble. So, but you can kind of see those kind of like ebb and flow moments where songs are never gone, but there's, and I've been able to watch this over the course of, directly over the course of probably 40 years, watch things come in and watch things go out. And I do think there's seasons. So like, renewal, even personal things. We're here at the Cincinnati Vineyard where we recorded a record 21 years ago called Dwell. So I'm kind of like living in that little moment. That's another little moment, at least certainly for me personally, a really powerful moment. So I could go on, but that's
great. I love that. And I love that you can locate your own story, not only in the Vineyard, but there are these song markers that happen through.
Yeah. I think jumping off that, it does sort of timestamp it for you a little bit too. Like when these songs come out, you're kind of immediately brought back to a space in your life, and even like coming all the way back to why we did this thing in the first place. And we definitely had these things happen in Denver where people are like, oh my gosh, I remember what the Lord met me here and here. And I think songs have just an easier way for us to kind of access those moments where God has intersected our lives, and even specific seasons and years and dates and times and stuff.
Jumping off of that, Melissa, I wonder, you helped us plan a bunch of this. You were running the spreadsheets and making everything happen in the background. But I wonder, for you, what are some of the songs in the course of the Vineyard that have a place in your life?
Oh, that's a big question, because I've been in the Vineyard quite a long time. Actually, in the moment, in the midst of the actual history of the Vineyard, Refiner's Fire started, right? And I just experienced the presence of the Lord, and it brings
You're talking about during the session.
During the session.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can go on a list of lots of songs in my life and markers, but during the session, Refiner's Fire, which then brings you back to these markers and places in your life. So, and then I think as we were going through this, right, we all have markers, all of us, even you listening to this, of things that meant a lot for us. But we have so many songs in the Vineyard that it's hard to then narrow it, right? And so that's part of what we did here in this session.
Yeah. Well, tell me about another song that means something to you.
Well, I have many songs that mean something. So I grew up in a church with the Butler family, right? And so the Butlers are significant songwriters in the Vineyard. And so I don't know if anyone knows the song Cry My Heart. But really, This Is Love is a huge one for me. So for me, that song, This Is Love, which I know many people know, that's my mentor, Terry Butler, wrote that song with my worship pastor at the time. They co-wrote it together. And so it was very specific to my church and in my heart. And then it's really cool to see that song spread across the world, and be sung around the world. So that's.
And how old were you then?
Oh my gosh. I was probably 10-ish.
Whoa.
I think, right?
Isn't that? I don't know. I mean,
I think it's 10-ish.
Maybe.
No, I was maybe 16-ish.
I love it. Yeah. That's too good.
Got to
Leave that
call
in,
down
Casey.
from the booth.
Yes, I love that. Yeah. Too good.
It's amazing how songs come from places, though.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I kept remembering throughout, not only throughout the session, but throughout even our prep and thinking through all the incredible wealth of songs that we have in the Vineyard. Each of these songs comes from a place, right? I have Holy and Anointed One. I see John Barnett in his closet or whatever, in his dirty overalls. It's all a myth in my head, right?
Yeah.
But from that story comes that song, which then, it goes around the world. But what's most interesting to me is not just that these songs can travel, but it's that when they travel, they bring with them something of the original seeds in the soil of what God was doing. And I think, with all due respect to sort of the way that the other ways you can write worship songs, there's something about the kind of organic, earthy reality of that doesn't just mean a lot to me. I think it actually is part of why these songs are so powerful, because they come from somewhere.
I love that. And maybe Casey, you could pick this up again. Could you just riff with us for a minute here about maybe some of the places songs have come from?
Oh yeah.
I mean,
right.
We've already mentioned Langley. Just tell people who don't know.
Langley, and I'm just, and there's kind of layers to this too, because I'm just, as I hear Melissa talking and remembering, say, This Is Love, or of course Terry and Randy and Mike Young, of course, others have written a lot of those songs. That's a Southern California thing by and large, but that's like Pomona. That's a very Arcadia, Pomona, Butler. Some of it's around those things. San Gabriel Valley. And it also reminds me of something we say a lot in Vineyard Worship Essentials is we're the Vineyard, and wine analogies we use a lot, but that sense of terroir, songs that come from the soil, so these songs taste like a certain place. Langley's certain one of them. It's hard to avoid, Orange County, Anaheim. That's, one of the original,
of course,
kind of thin places, as we might say. I am struck by the Central Coast. This may or may not be a commonly known item, but Central Coast at different times had Danny Daniels, Carl Tuttle,
Scott Underwood,
John and Marie Barnett lived there for a season, Jeff Searles,
Delmore,
Darren and Jesse Clark, and Sam Lane spent a summer there. Then you can kind of feel even in those writers that I named, Underwood in particular. And I'm in the Central Coast a lot, but there is a pacing, and even like a rootsy element to a lot of things that come from that particular area. But there's a song like I Love Your Presence or You Bless Me, Lord's come up a lot. Those feel like a song from a place of peace and the kind of things that I think the Central Coast embodies. Yeah.
That is so cool to me.
Yeah.
I love that. Name some other places, because some people are just, they come to the conference, they pastor a Vineyard church, maybe they sing some of the songs, but they literally don't know that these have locations on the map.
Right. Well, I just think, without going through every little nuance, I do think of like, there's kind of a Northwest thing, like Portland, Seattle. A lot of the early Rita Springer songs came out of there. Kelly Carpenter, Draw Me Close.
Yeah.
Randy Butler landed in the Northwest. Some of my stories based in the Northwest. I also think of Canada in general, which is, there's Langley certainly, but there's, David Roos, who's kind of
Kelowna.
bounced around Kelowna, inland BC, and touching down in Winnipeg. There's like another related thing in kind of Toronto, Cambridge, the Dan Wilt, Bruce Ellis thing.
That's so fun.
There is, how do we not look at the UK? There's, of course, a lot of that, and that's even seeded by Dirksen. Brian Dirksen goes over there, and in Brian's, I've heard him say this, like, he didn't like create what was happening in the UK, but he did rally it. So like when he showed up in the UK, there was a young Britton Brown, Mark James, and that eventually a young Sam Lane, which also touches, because we're a Vineyard intersected family, we kind of cross-pollinate in these different worlds. Southeast, which, can start with even, people like Crispin Schroeder, Not Be Moved, to like Campbellsville.
Yeah.
Mike O'Brien's done lots of work through the years, seeding things in the Southeast.
And part of what I hear you say, though, part of what's coming up in this conversation, which we didn't plan, but is actually very present to me, is what we're talking about is songs tend to be markers in the Vineyard of times, but also places.
Yes,
which is very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, then there's a Colorado thing. And like, even like Danny Daniels. Now there's Tim Brown, Annabeth Morgan. There's kind of that generation of things. But Randy Rigby, who's like was also touched base in the Central Coast and in Orange County, but it kind of exported to Denver, to the point like a guy like Michael Pritzl from Violet Burning started in the Orange County, but then did a record up in Denver with that whole crew. So there was a Denver thing.
I freaking love that. I love
it's
that.
Like micro scenes. These are the micro scenes within. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I hear two things in there. For me, just as somebody who came a little later, but came early enough that I understand the story and I've lived some of it. I hear our story has roots. It's real. It goes through time and it has places, and it's coming from a people. But then the other thing I hear is, maybe you're a young person or maybe you're new to the Vineyard. I hear the hope of, like, if you want to be a part, like part of what I'm hearing in this is like, if you want to be a part, sometimes you just have to go to a place. Sometimes you have to become a part of a people, like maybe it's just over there. I mean, I know it's everywhere, but sometimes, like when it comes to songs or distillations of our story or the power of the Spirit, like maybe you have to go to the Central Coast for a minute,
Well,
it's connected.
I don't know if this will wrap it up for me, but it also makes me think about, like, just as we push in, like, I remember you introducing me, kind of pushing Tina Cologne at the time towards me.
Dude, Tina's not a hard sell.
Yeah. No, she's not. In the like 2009, 2010.
Yeah.
But it's coming out of that eastern, northeastern, a little smarter, like, academic, but also like leaning into like the kingdom, expanding into things like social justice, and certainly the bilingual. Of course we have like a very international story, but like kind of like different themes, or like Columbus's work, just to diversify their expression of worship, and these days kind of, being coalescing under Joshua Miller's leadership.
Yeah.
And these are the efforts of local places and local churches that are trying to find new ways to express what it is to be the Vineyard.
Totally. I mean, there's something so interesting to me about all this. One of the centerpieces of the Story of the Vineyard and Song session was Exalt the Lord, right? When we were planning it, and we may talk about this in a bit, like there were some songs that absolutely had to be in there, and that's one of them. And Cindy tells the story of writing that song in one of the videos before we sang it together. And what I'm aware of in that is, I mean, that song is so very much of a place, but it's definitely Orange County. It's definitely, the kind of Yorba Linda vibe, but it's also, I mean, it's a home group, right? Yeah. And the song that can bring sort of an articulation to the experience of what God was doing among his people in that place, has this kind of simultaneously like rooted local and sort of evergreen quality.
Well, and that song is a co-write too with Brian. So it's actually it is Orange County, but it's also the cross-pollination of the Langley.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Langley and Anaheim.
Okay.
Crossover.
Yeah,
as well.
Totally. And you know, and
I know too many things.
You
Caleb.
do. You know a lot of things. You are the brain. But
I'm sorry.
No, it's good. But my experience as a worship. So I mean, I've been leading worship for my whole adult life at this point, like mostly in cities and mostly in places where there was a good Vineyard presence, but it wasn't like mainstream in the same way that it was in SoCal or the Central Coast maybe. And I think that a lot of what came out of those environments in terms of worship was slightly like resistant in a good way to the culture that it was in as well. It was kind of like, maybe, I don't know, how do you say it? This could sound weird in our moment, but almost a little militant. Like, we're going to sing these songs which cut against the grain of a lot of the way that the culture around us flows, and we're going to sing them because we know them to be true, right? So I think of a song like Generous God, right? A Chicago song, or even an old school Chicago song, My Redeemer Lives, John Willison, right? Which in its day was a banger, right? And that's a song that was essentially prophesying to a world that didn't care. It comes out of Job, right? Another great story of a world that doesn't care. And he's declaring the future that will be. There's so many stories like this, but
I love it. Nicole, you haven't talked yet. I wonder if maybe you could just tell everyone a little bit about how we brought this session together, because this is meant to be a little bit behind the scenes. So maybe you could just talk for a moment about how did we pull this together and some of the things that we did at your house.
Yeah, I would love to. Well, we started on Zoom. We tried to do this on Zoom. And like all things, it wasn't as good on Zoom as if we were just going to be in a room together. And so everyone flew out to Denver, and we spent the day in my dining room. And I think I even have some pictures of this, but it ended up with large Post-it notes on every wall of that room.
And by large Post-it notes, we mean like giant sheets of paper that happen to be sticky.
Yes. I think there's still some paint missing from one of my walls as we took it off. And
charge it to VUSA.
Done.
Joyce, we're painting the kitchen.
But it was interesting. So I think we sat down and we thought, how are we telling this story? Are we telling this chronologically? Are we telling it thematically? Are we telling it like what songs can we not miss? And also recognizing everyone in that room is going to get disappointed at one point. We all had a song that we wish would be on there that we could have been singing all night, and we knew at some point we actually have to keep this into a time-stamped session that people want to be at. So, and then we knew, of course, people outside, everyone has their song. One of the things that I thought about a lot as we were in that room is so many people talk about, when I came into the Vineyard, I just knew I was home. Like, everyone has these stories. And as I was thinking about that, I thought that probably happened during worship, where someone walks into a room, and just by the liturgy of the way that most Vineyard churches run, they probably walked in the room, they walk in during worship, they experience the presence of God during that moment, and it stamps them in a way. And then our minds and our hearts connect to that song. And so you're going to disappoint somebody, right? Because we're not going to have every song that everyone walked into in their moment. And so we ended up with these large sticky notes all over the walls of just 1,000 songs. I don't know how many were up there, but it was a lot.
There were lots of songs.
There were so many songs.
And what's wild is every song that was on the wall is a great song.
Yes.
These are not good songs. The catalog is filled with great songs.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's just that work of taking your favorite things and going, maybe not. Or fighting for that song to be in, but after what happened though, after we put these up, is we started to realize there were some themes.
Yeah.
And so that really helped, didn't it?
It really helped a lot. And it didn't hurt to have someone like Casey in the room. We pulled down some of the guitars from my house, and we could just start playing through songs too. And I think even the way I just experienced so much of God's presence with us, even in that time, reminding us of who we are as we tried to lead and curate this session. And it just felt like the Holy Spirit was with us, which was beautiful. And it was very, very fun. If you've been enjoying this interview about the history of the Vineyard in Song session, you'll love watching the session online with friends or people from your church community. Stay connected in the coming weeks as we'll be releasing this session and all of the sessions from our conference this summer, Seed and Soil. Make sure to stay tuned to vineyardusa.org and vineyardworship.com. We can't wait for you to see it.
When I think about that day that we spent like really hashing this out, I just laughed the whole day.
We did.
I had a lot of fun.
Well, it actually ended. This is a real inside moment, but we went to dinner that night and it started snowing outside in a restaurant. We were being snowed on while eating excellent food. So
yes. My favorite part was it you, Caleb, who was asking the sweet waitress lady, "Hey, we're sitting outside. We're getting snowed on. We should get a discount." She's like, "No."
I did ask for 20% off.
Welcome to Denver.
She's like, "No."
Yeah, I'm literally covered in snow.
Yeah. Hey, this paella is great.
Exactly.
But it has snow on it. Yeah. And I don't know if that was the way the chef intended it to happen.
Life keeps you humble.
It does. It really does. Yeah. Melissa, what do you want to say? Your hand is up.
That I remembered during this,
Yes.
if that's okay. One moment that stuck out to me is when you said the word tool belt. Remember this? And you were we were kind of going through like, what do we look at? Do we look at years? Do we look at this or that? But you were like, it's interesting to think about through those years and that timeline, the things that God gave us in those moments and in our tool belt. That really stuck out to us, I think. And so I just thought that might be interesting.
Well, it is. I mean, the songs do stuff. Right? I mean, Dan Wilt has said for years and years, songs are a place that you go. Songs are also tools, I think. They give you the ability to pastor a room in a certain direction, right? I think, there's obviously, in our moment in particular, we have to be very cautious about being manipulative with songs. But songs are also meant to be used in particular moments to move a room in a direction. I mean, I always remember the story, Casey, you told me about Wimber instructing songwriters to write songs about the cross, right? And I'm sure there were lots of other moments like that where there was just a pastoral awareness. We need to inject something specific into this room, or all the songs of renewal or the songs of healing and, right? The songs of scripture. I was talking to someone on the airplane flying into Cincinnati yesterday who was also at the conference. She was talking about how she learned so much of the Bible from singing Vineyard songs. And she would find a psalm and be like, oh, I've known this for years. It's in a song. So yeah, tools in the tool belt for sure.
Well, and Caleb, while you have the microphone, maybe you could just riff for a moment on how we decided to settle into the themes that emerged.
Yeah.
Like, why did we see that?
Yeah.
How did we see that?
Well, to me, so there's sort of 5 major movements of the story, right? The first movement is essentially a place. It's a home group. And that felt to me really important because especially in the way that worship culture has kind of taken off and there can be so much high production, less in the Vineyard than in other places, but the way that we've sort of been tuned to expect worship to be delivered
we have LED
to us.
So
do we have lasers?
Next year.
If we don't have lasers, I'm not coming.
Yes.
No, but all of the best of our music, as we've already talked about before, it generally emerges from small worshiping spaces. So, and some of the kind of stone cold classics like Isn't He, like Spirit's song, like You Are Here, came out of that. So I think we wanted that to be immediately recognized. And then from there, it was really interesting actually because we decided not to do the story chronologically, but instead to do it thematically. Part of that's just pragmatic, which is there's way too many songs. If you go chronologically, you're just toast. But another part of it was there's a kind of almost Trinitarian structure, perhaps even to our development, because there is a weird sort of chronological reality to this as well. Early in the life of the Vineyard, we started to get a lot of songs about the mercy of God, the fatherhood of God, and those became perennial, and there's lots of newer ones about that too. But so we thought theme 1 could be merciful Father. And then coming out of that, what we started to see was there's a lot of songs about obedience to Jesus. And Ed Pioric talked about this in a clip that we used and on the Ferment podcast, where he said that in his life growing up as an evangelical, I guess that would have been probably in the 60s and 70s for him, he had never really known that you could experience the fatherhood of God in a merciful way. Your father was meant to sort of tell you what to do.
Scare you a little bit.
Yeah, scare you a little bit.
Respect.
Exactly. But he's like, I came into the Vineyard and I was just like hit in the chest by loving, merciful, embracing fatherhood, which then in turn precipitated obedience, right? So it's both is obedience. You get to obedience either way, but one is out of a response to the love of the Father. So then we talked about obedience to Jesus, which I think was the natural response. And then the fourth theme is the power of the Spirit. We just have tons of songs about the renewal of the Holy Spirit, and may we never, ever stop singing those songs. And then finally, as we closed it out, and people should watch this because your talk, which we can't really, Adam, your talk, which we can't really reproduce here, was an integral part of this. We talked about having received all of that, God has called us into community. So the last section is about the church. And hearing Annabeth's story on the video and some of the rallying cry from you, Adam, about what God has given us and what God continues to give to us, it just felt like we're moving into a spot where we get to talk about being a people among whom God lives, and who's going to keep shaping and developing us to share the gospel through his presence for generations. It was amazing. So that's how we came together.
Well, here's part of what I noticed when we were working that out, because we're in Nicole's living room, kitchen, and there's so many songs everywhere. Casey's playing them. And I'm a little bewildered at one moment. I'm having a great time, but I'm a little bewildered because I'm like, how are we going to do this?
Yeah.
But then finally you start to notice, there's themes here, and we can just lean into the themes, which felt like a lot of relief in terms of planning. Like, and they're like, okay, this feels legal. This feels like, okay, we can do this. But then when we're finished, we do something that to me feels honoring to the Vineyard. It's true to the story. But the thing I noticed is, man, when you look at it, it's so darn orthodox.
Well, yeah.
it's so like classically also Christian. And I mean that in a way that isn't just the Vineyard, right?
Yeah,
like
right.
It's like the Big C church.
Well, that's the story of the Vineyard. I mean, the story of the Vineyard has always, always, always been that we don't just want to know what the Bible says. We want to live biblical lives. But if you start learning what the Bible says and then trying to live into it, the more you do that, like before God, the more sort of fundamentally Christian that's going to make you, right? We've never been people who are innovators for its own sake. I mean, sometimes innovation emerges and that's great, but really all we're trying to do is be simple, straightforward, unencumbered biblical Christians. And so it's not surprising to me that happened, but I agree with you. It is a relief.
It is a relief. And it's just interesting that we wanted to tell the Vineyard story, which I think we did. And then, but what emerges is like a deeply, I hope, like Christian story. That's kind of what I noticed.
Yeah.
Like, wow. Totally. Maybe we're Christians.
We are Christians,
We're
Adam.
Christians, I think. You know? So good. Anything else we need to hit here?
I would like to talk about how wonderful it was to have Brian and Cindy with us.
Oh, yes, of course.
I mean, Joshua Miller was amazing as well. But
and Nicole.
Yeah, of course. And Nicole.
And Casey.
And Casey, especially Casey. In particular, can we talk more about Casey? We just do maybe five or 10 minutes on Casey's guitar playing.
Yes.
But honestly, to have Brian and Cindy, who haven't been with us at a national conference leading worship in a few years, was just so special to me. I mean, the way the room responded to the chorus of Exalt the Lord is hard to talk about because you might start crying. It's like a song they sing in heaven, or, you've said, Adam, before that Faithful One maybe is the most Vineyard song.
I could be the most Vineyard song of all Vineyard songs.
It's so good. I have a personal story of getting the tape of Changed by Your Glory, and I used to ride the train to my high school, and I listening to this tape on the train, and it just ungluing me and then putting me back together. And I'm realizing I'm not just a believer. I think I'm like a Vineyard person. And those were songs from a local church. Notably, those weren't songs that were being deliberately produced by Vineyard Worship at the time. That was just songs that were being written and recorded and offered as a gift to the church. And it changed me. So many people were changed by it. So
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, Melissa, maybe you could also talk a little bit about, we did have Brian, we did have Cindy, we did have Joshua, we had Nicole Hernandez, and Casey. Just talk about our lead. What does that represent? Like when you hear those people on the stage, what does that represent to you?
Well, a big part of our conversation was just like helping people understand the whole story, right? So like where we started, where we've been, and where we're going.
Yes.
And so I think that group of worship leaders represents that. It's who we are, like where we started, where we've gone, and where we're going, and they all did it together. Like we are all together in this journey, right? And so I love that combination. It was beautiful. We sang in Spanish, we sang old songs, we sang new songs. It was a really beautiful, beautiful time.
It was actually one of my favorite pieces of the night, which is maybe not immediately present to you because Caleb's right. Exalt the Lord kind of knocks you over.
Yeah.
But after you sort of recover from that, you realize, oh, Cindy's like the first female worship leader in the Vineyard. And no one is maybe more the forward face of the Vineyard to the world than maybe Brian. In terms of like known songwriter and influencer in that way. But then who's been around the Vineyard longer than Casey? And then to have Nicole Hernandez get up and sing Spanish, which there's a sense in which this has always been present in the Vineyard, but not to the degree that it is now. And you can feel the way that we're going there more.
Yeah.
And then for me, Joshua Miller represents that brackish water of modern worship, but also whatever this modern gospel expression is that has found a genuine home and is no longer, I just don't think it's aspirational for the Vineyard anymore. It's just kind of like who we are.
It's true.
Like I sort of like joked during the night, like I don't even notice when we sing in Spanish anymore because it's just kind of like what we do. And I'm the least Spanish person in the universe, right? But when we sing in Spanish, I don't even notice. It's just like, this is what we do. And so this is one of my favorite pieces of the night is that all these generations and all these people from very different places could minister together, that it could feel like a harmony, and it could be Vineyard.
Yeah.
It felt like, oh, this is the Vineyard.
Yeah.
And there's a spot for me in here somewhere.
Yeah. Can we also talk about how it ended, at least in Denver, and we can all just, hope that it's the same here. But the party at the end, Familia, the jumping and the dancing, right?
Yeah.
That's how we ended. It was amazing. That
was really special.
Well, and I'd say about that moment too, when we were in Denver, all these youth just flooded the front area right in front of the stage, dancing and jumping, like you were saying. To me, it almost felt like a promise from the Lord. Like, I've heard so many stories about back at the high school and people running into the room because they were so excited for worship. And I experienced some of that in the late 90s as I came into the Vineyard, of just that level of excitement. But to see our youth running in, they'd been poured into by our Vineyard youth folks all week long. But they were so excited to be with us. And I loved having this really be a service for everybody. Like there were kids in the room, there were youth in the room, there were older folks in the room. And some people were probably remembering their calling. That's what we were hoping for.
Yeah.
But maybe some were discovering it too.
That's right.
I just thought it was beautiful.
Totally. So I want to, Adam, ask you to reflect a little bit, because there's something about, like, even back to where we started with what does worship do? When I'm thinking about Ted Kim's video
Yeah.
and where he talks about how the Lord radically changed his life, like in the context of worship. He talks about sometimes worship would be over, like the music would be over, but he wasn't done worshiping.
Yes.
And so he's laying on the back of the, on the stage, or on the, in the back of the room, just continuing to worship the Lord quietly. Just talk about the power of the Spirit and the space that gets made by worship. Because if we are anything in the Vineyard, we're people who are trying to connect those dots. Mm-hmm. And that's something I think you've given a lot of your life to. Mm-hmm. So talk about what you saw there.
Yeah, I mean, Ted tells a story that's very personal to him, but I think is one of the most common stories in the Vineyard is just getting kind of like knocked over by worship.
Yeah.
Or getting caught up. To requote Dan Wilt, you go someplace. Like the song takes you someplace. It's a connection between heaven and earth, to use a little NT Wright. Heaven and earth overlap in those moments.
Yeah.
And it's not fake, or it's not made up. One of the ways, and this comes from even a worship experience that I had, as sometimes happens, they become visionary prophetic moments. If we could just go there for a moment.
Sure.
But I remember in a worship moment once really being touched by the power of the Spirit, but mostly the love of God. So if we were just to crystallize it down into one thing, it's like the love of God is landing on my body. And I began to have kind of an open vision, and the open vision was very simple. It was of a house, and I realized that I had lived my whole life on the first floor, and I heard the voice of the Spirit tell me in the most clear way, "Hey, Adam, this house has another story." And what I understood in that moment is that in worship, you get to go upstairs, and there's stuff up there that gets to influence what goes on downstairs. And, sometimes we just live as though it's just a one-story brick ranch.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's like worship is this place where whatever's going on upstairs begins to come downstairs. And for me, that's just a Vineyard story.
Yeah.
Like in worship, I mean, how many times has this happened? I remember this happened at a worship moment at one of our worship leader retreats in Cannon Beach. And Tim Brown is leading worship. And he leads Saved. And here's what's funny. I remember the first time I heard that song recorded, I was like, nice song, whatever, not for me, That's literally what I thought. Nice song, not for me.
Yeah.
And Tim is leading this in Cannon Beach, and the power of Jesus' love is like in the room. I'm on the front row, and I am getting overtaken by it's like an ocean wave of the love of Jesus is coming all over me. And I'm like, the first thing I thought was, I was wrong. This song is taking me somewhere. And when we began to sing at the end, that little bridge tag, I love, the room is coming apart. And it's not just, youthful exuberance, or it's not just a social proposition. It is a response to, like, the beginning of that song was God saying, I love you. And for me, that's just, that's what I hope every single time we get together. That's what I hope happens.
Yeah.
Those kinds of connections, those kinds of exchanges, those kinds of moments.
Like an integration between all the different parts of life with God and the way that it sort of fits together in experience.
Yes.
That's so good.
Yeah.
I think it's what we do.
And it's what we have to keep doing.
It's what we got to keep doing.
Yes, we're not just going to write books or preach sermons. And by the way, we all in this room, we all do some of that, right? We all write some stuff. We all preach some stuff. We make videos. We make content, using air quotes here. We do church. We train up leaders. We do all that stuff. But my goodness, in the Vineyard, we're going to, hopefully have a real life with God that finds its expression in a song that isn't just from us or for us, but it's like for all of us. And it does something in the room.
That's right.
And, for me, there's nothing more exciting than that. Amen.
Amen.
High five, everybody.
Yeah.
Peace.
As we celebrate our 50-year anniversary in the Vineyard, if you're interested in learning more about Vineyard history, there are plenty of resources for you. Check out our show notes for links to books, YouTube videos, and more to learn about Vineyard history and identity. And make sure to keep listening to the podcast this year for stories of Vineyard churches throughout the year.